in the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and dreams were as vast as the horizon, there lived a man who had it all, or so everyone thought. His name was Ethan Carter, a self-made millionaire CEO whose life was a whirlwind of boardroom meetings, luxury cars, and five-star dinners. To most people, he was the epitome of success, someone who had cracked the code to life's greatest mysteries: wealth, power, and influence. But beneath that polished exterior lay a man disconnected from the world around him, too busy chasing numbers on spreadsheets to notice the humanity slipping through his fingers. One morning, as Ethan stepped out of his chauffeur-driven car in the financial district, someone caught his eye. A street vendor, no older than 30, stood at the corner with a modest cart that smelled like home-cooked meals. The vendor's hands moved deftly, flipping fried eggs onto beds of steaming rice while chatting warmly with customers. For a fleeting moment, Ethan felt an inexplicable pull toward the scene. Yet pride and habit quickly took over, and he walked past without so much as a glance back. Little did he know, this small act of dismissal would set into motion a chain of events that would forever change his perspective and perhaps even his soul. The aroma of garlic-infused oil, wafting from the cart, lingered faintly in the air long after Ethan had disappeared into the glass doors of his corporate tower. It wasn't just any smell. It carried memories, stories, and emotions tied to simpler times when food wasn't ordered via apps but shared across tables under open skies. That day, however, Ethan barely registered it. His mind was preoccupied with quarterly reports, shareholder expectations, and the gnawing pressure to keep climbing higher. He didn't have time for distractions, let alone a roadside meal served by a stranger. As he settled into his leather chair overlooking the cityscape, sipping his overpriced espresso, he couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something about that vendor seemed different. Maybe it was the way they smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression rarely seen in his world of calculated pleasantries. Or maybe it was the laughter echoing from the cart, a sound so foreign yet oddly comforting amidst the cold hum of traffic and concrete. Whatever it was, Ethan dismissed it as irrelevant noise, convincing himself that such trivialities had no place in his meticulously curated existence. Meanwhile, down below, the street vendor named Leo continued his routine with quiet determination. Life hadn't been kind to him. He'd dropped out of school to support his family, juggled odd jobs, and eventually found solace in cooking. His cart wasn't just a means of survival. It was his canvas, a way to pour love and care into every dish he prepared. People often remarked how his fried egg with rice tasted different, not because of some secret ingredient, but because of the warmth behind it. "It's like eating happiness," one customer once said, leaving Leo beaming for days. What no one knew, though, was that Leo harbored a dream far bigger than his tiny cart. He wanted to open a restaurant someday, a cozy little place where people could gather, share stories, and leave feeling lighter than when they arrived. But dreams like that required more than passion. They needed opportunity, connections, and resources. And as much as Leo tried to remain hopeful, there were days when hope felt like a fragile thread threatening to snap. On this particular morning, as he watched a sharply dressed man stride past without acknowledgement, Leo sighed softly. "Another mischance," he muttered under his breath, unaware that fate sometimes works in mysterious ways. Ethan's day unfolded predictably. Mails flooded his inbox. Colleagues sought his approval, and assistants hovered nearby, ready to cater to his every whim. Yet despite the flurry of activity, his thoughts kept drifting back to the vendor. Why, he couldn't explain it. Perhaps it was guilt, or curiosity, or maybe just boredom. Whatever the reason, by lunchtime, he found himself staring out the window again, watching the ebb and flow of life below. From his vantage point, the vendor's cart looked almost insignificant against the backdrop of towering buildings and endless streams of people rushing to their destinations. But up close, Ethan imagined it might feel entirely different. The idea unsettled him. Wasn't he supposed to be above such things now? Hadn't he earned the right to ignore what others deemed essential? Still, the memory of the vendor's smile lingered, taunting him with its simplicity. By the time evening rolled around, Ethan decided he needed fresh air. Maybe a walk would clear his head, and if he happened to pass by the cart again, well, that would purely be coincidence. As Ethan stepped outside, the city greeted him with its usual cacophony of sounds: honking horns, distant chatter, and the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on pavement. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues over everything it touched. For a moment, he paused, taking in the scene before him. It was strange how beautiful the ordinary could look when you stopped to pay attention. His gaze inevitably drifted toward the street vendor's cart, still standing proudly at its corner. A line of customers stretched out, each person waiting patiently for their turn. Something about the sight stirred a mix of envy and admiration within. Ethan here was a man who commanded loyalty not through authority or wealth but through authenticity and connection. How many CEOs could say the same? Shaking his head, Ethan reminded himself why he was here: to stretch his legs, not to dwell on philosophical musings. With deliberate steps, he approached the cart, pretending to browse other stalls along the way. When he finally reached Leo, he hesitated, unsure of what to say or do. The vendor, oblivious to Ethan's internal struggle, greeted him with the same cheerful grin he reserved for everyone else. "What can I get you today?" Leo asked, his voice warm and inviting. Ethan opened his mouth to respond but found himself tongue-tied. This wasn't part of the plan. He hadn't expected the vendor's kindness to disarm him so completely. Sensing Ethan's hesitation, chuckled lightly. "First time ordering street food, huh?" he teased, his tone playful yet non-judgmental. The comment broke the ice, prompting Ethan to nod awkwardly. "You could say that," he admitted, his words clipped but polite. Leo leaned forward slightly, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well then, let me introduce you to my specialty, the fried egg with rice. Trust me, it's a game changer." There was something infectious about Leo's enthusiasm, a quality that made resistance seem futile. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed. "Fine, I'll try it." As Leo began preparing the dish, his movements were fluid and practiced, almost artistic. He cracked the egg with precision, letting it sizzle in the pan before adding a dash of seasoning. The rice followed, cooked to perfection and infused with subtle flavors that hinted at hours of preparation. Throughout the process, Leo chatted casually, sharing snippets of his day and cracking jokes that drew smiles from those nearby. Watching him work, Ethan realized how detached he'd become from the simple joys of life. In his pursuit of success, he'd forgotten what it meant to create, to connect, to live fully in the present moment. By the time the plate was ready, wrapped neatly in paper and handed over with a flourish, Ethan felt a pang of something unfamiliar - gratitude. Holding the warm parcel in his hands, Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to retreat to the safety of his office, where everything was predictable and controlled. But another part, the part that had been quietly whispering for change, urged him to stay. He glanced around, noticing how effortlessly Leo interacted with his customers. They weren't just transactions. They were interactions filled with respect and mutual understanding. Ethan envied that sense of belonging, the ease with which Leo navigated relationships without pretense or ulterior motives. Taking a deep breath, he unwrapped the package and took a tentative bite. The flavors exploded in his mouth, savory, comforting, and surprisingly complex. It wasn't just food. It was a story told through taste, a reminder of simpler times when meals were shared rather than consumed in solitude. For a brief moment, Ethan forgot about deadlines, profits, and power plays. All that mattered was the here and now, the satisfaction of nourishment, both physical and emotional. When he finally looked up, meeting Leo's expectant gaze, he managed a small smile. "This is good," he said, the understatement hanging between them like an unspoken promise. Leo grinned, clearly pleased with the compliment. "Told you it was a game changer," he replied, his confidence unwavering. Ethan nodded absently, still processing the experience. It wasn't just the meal that had left an impression, it was the entire encounter. The vendor's humility, his passion, and his ability to find joy in the mundane struck a chord deep within Ethan. These were qualities he hadn't encountered in years, not since his own rise to prominence had distanced him from the very essence of humanity. As he lingered by the cart, watching Leo serve others with the same dedication, Ethan felt a flicker of inspiration ignite within him. Maybe there was more to life than boardrooms and bank accounts. Maybe true fulfillment came from creating moments like these, where people walked away not just fed but fulfilled. The realization unnerved him. Could he, a man who prided himself on logic and strategy, learn to embrace such intangible values? Before he could delve deeper into these thoughts, Leo interrupted gently. "Hey, you okay? You've got that look like you're solving world peace or something." His words brought Ethan back to reality, eliciting a chuckle despite himself. "Just thinking," he murmured, folding the empty wrapper neatly about what Leo pressed, his curiosity genuine. Ethan hesitated, torn between revealing too much and saying nothing at all. Before Ethan could formulate a response, a commotion erupted nearby. A group of teenagers, laughing loudly, accidentally knocked over a stack of crates belonging to another vendor. Chaos ensued as items scattered across the pavement, drawing disapproving glares from passers-by. Without missing a beat, Leo sprang into action, abandoning his post to help clean up the mess. His actions were instinctive, born not out of obligation but compassion. Watching him assist the flustered vendor, Ethan felt a surge of admiration mixed with shame. How many times had he turned a blind eye to similar situations, prioritizing his agenda over basic human decency? The contrast between Leo's selflessness and his own detachment was glaring, forcing Ethan to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. By the time order was restored, Leo returned to his cart, unfazed by the interruption. "Sorry about that," he said breezily, wiping his hands on a towel. "No big deal." To him it truly wasn't. Helping others came naturally, a reflex ingrained through years of hardship and resilience. Ethan, however, couldn't shake the image of Leo bending down to pick up someone else's burden. It was a lesson in humility delivered without words, a silent rebuke to his insulated worldview. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. Ethan knew he should leave, his schedule demanded it, but he couldn't bring himself to move. Instead, he lingered, observing the rhythm of life unfolding before him. Vendors packed up their carts, children played tag between parked cars, and couples strolled hand in hand, oblivious to the chaos of the city. It was a tapestry of moments, each thread woven together to form a picture of coexistence. Leo too began winding down, stacking plates and securing lids with practiced efficiency. Sensing Ethan's continued presence, he glanced up with a knowing smile. "You sticking around for dinner next?" he joked, lightening the mood. Ethan shook his head, though his expression remained thoughtful. "Maybe another time," he replied, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. Leo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Another time, huh? Guess I'll hold you to that." There was no malice in his tone, only warmth and camaraderie. As Ethan turned to leave, he felt a strange reluctance tugging at him. This encounter, seemingly insignificant, had planted seeds of introspection he wasn't ready to face. Yet as he walked away, the weight of unresolved questions pressed heavily on his shoulders. What had drawn him to this vendor in the first place? And why did the idea of returning feel less like obligation and more like necessity? Back in the sterile confines of his office, Ethan stared blankly at the documents spread across his desk. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead was a stark contrast to the vibrant energy of the streets below. Try as he might, he couldn't focus. Images of Leo's cart, the laughter of customers, and the taste of fried egg with rice kept resurfacing, pulling him back to a world he'd long abandoned. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was longing for connection, for purpose, for meaning beyond profit margins. He picked up his phone, scrolling aimlessly until he landed on a photo app. Tapping through old pictures, he paused at one taken years ago during a family vacation. In it, a younger Ethan sat cross-legged on a beach, devouring a plate of local delicacies while his parents laughed in the background. That version of himself seemed almost unrecognizable now, untouched by ambition and untainted by cynicism. Closing the app abruptly, Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. Was it possible to reclaim that part of himself, or had he strayed too far to find his way back? The question haunted him, lingering like an unfinished melody waiting to resolve. Hours passed, yet sleep eluded Ethan. Restless, he paced the length of his penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling mockingly outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. Every step echoed hollowly, amplifying the emptiness gnawing at him. He tried distracting himself with work emails, news updates, even a late-night snack, but nothing provided relief. Eventually, he settled on the couch, clutching a cup of tea that had gone cold. His mind replayed the day's events in vivid detail: the vendor's smile, the aroma of spices, the camaraderie among strangers sharing a meal. Each memory carried a weight he couldn't ignore, challenging the foundations of his carefully constructed identity. Who was he, really, beneath the suits and titles? And what did he stand to lose or gain by embracing the humanity he'd spent years suppressing? As dawn crept closer, Ethan made a decision. Tomorrow he would return to the street vendors, caught not out of obligation or curiosity, but because something inside him refused to let go. Whether it was courage or recklessness driving him, he couldn't say. All he knew was that the next chapter of his story awaited, written not in boardroom minutes but in the messy, unpredictable script of real life. When morning arrived, Ethan rose earlier than usual, his nerves buzzing with anticipation. The streets were quieter now, bathed in soft sunlight that promised new beginnings. He dressed casually for once, trading his tailored suit for jeans and a sweater. It felt strange, almost liberating, to shed the armor he wore daily. As he approached the familiar corner, his pulse quickened. Would Leo remember him? Would the magic of their previous encounter repeat itself? Questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and urgent. When the cart came into view, Leo was already hard at work, humming a tune under his breath. Catching sight of Ethan, he paused mid-flip, surprise flickering across his face. Well, he said, breaking into a grin. "Didn't think I'd see you again so soon." Ethan smiled sheepishly, suddenly unsure of what to say. I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice steadier than he expected. "For yesterday, it made me realize." His words trailed off as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. Realize what? That success without substance was meaningless. That connection trumped control. That a simple meal could unravel years of conditioning. Leo tilted his head, studying him intently. "Realize what?" he prompted gently. Ethan swallowed hard, the truth hovering just beyond reach. Before he could articulate it, a sudden commotion erupted behind them, drawing their attention. A delivery truck screeched to a halt, spilling crates onto the road. Instinctively, both men rushed to help, their earlier conversation momentarily forgotten amidst the chaos. Ethan caught Leo's eye, and for the first time, he saw not just a vendor but a mirror reflecting the person he aspired to become. As the dust settled and order was restored, Ethan straightened up, brushing dirt off his hands. The brief burst of adrenaline faded, leaving behind clarity. He glanced at Leo, who was already back at his cart, resuming his duties with characteristic calm. "You handle surprises well," Ethan remarked half-jokingly. Leo shrugged, grinning. "Comes with the territory. Life's full of curveballs. You either adapt or get left behind." The wisdom in his words struck a chord. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. Adaptation, resilience, these were traits he admired yet struggled to embody. Standing there, surrounded by the hum of urban life, he felt a shift within himself, subtle but undeniable awakening. "Listen," he said, his tone earnest. "I want to talk more. About everything. Can we meet later? Somewhere quieter?" Leo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Sure thing. Name the place." Ethan hesitated, then suggested a nearby cafe known for its cozy ambience. "Perfect," Leo replied, jotting down the address. "See you then." As they parted ways, Ethan felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This meeting wasn't just about gratitude or curiosity anymore. It was about exploring possibilities, bridging worlds, and perhaps discovering a path he never knew existed. Little did he know, their conversation would unlock secrets neither of them anticipated, setting the stage for revelations that would alter both their lives forever. Walking away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into uncharted territory. The cafe loomed ahead, its inviting facade promising sanctuary from the relentless pace of the city. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods, a comforting contrast to the raw intensity of the streets. He chose a corner table, positioning himself strategically to observe without being intrusive. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, Leo appeared, his entrance marked by a wave and a lopsided grin. Sliding into the seat opposite Ethan, he leaned forward, his expression curious. "All right, spill it," he said, cutting straight to the chase. "What's got you so worked up?" Ethan hesitated, grappling with how much to reveal. How could he convey the storm raging within him, the doubts, the yearnings, the hunger for something he couldn't quite define? Taking a deep breath, he began haltingly, piecing together fragments of thoughts into coherent sentences. "I guess I've been questioning things lately. My choices, my priorities. Meeting you, it stirred something up, made me see things differently." Leo listened intently, his gaze unwavering. When Ethan finished, silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Breaking it, Leo spoke softly. "Sometimes, all it takes is one moment to change everything. Are you ready for that?" Ethan stared at him, the weight of the question sinking in. Was he ready? Ready to dismantle the fortress he'd built around himself, brick by painstaking brick, ready to trade certainty for uncertainty, comfort for growth. The enormity of the decision paralyzed him momentarily. Yet somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited a desire to break free, to embrace vulnerability, to seek truth beyond superficial success. "I don't know," he admitted finally, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "But I need to find out." Leo nodded, understanding without judgment. "Then start with this," he said, sliding a napkin across the table. On it, he'd scribbled a single word: authenticity. "Whatever you choose, let that guide you." The simplicity of the advice struck Ethan profoundly. Authenticity. It sounded easy enough, yet he knew it would demand sacrifices, force him to confront fears he'd buried long ago. As they parted ways, Ethan clutching the napkin like a lifeline, he realized the journey ahead wouldn't be linear or predictable. But for the first time in years, he felt alive with purpose, with hope, with the tantalizing prospect of reinvention. What lay beyond the horizon remained unclear. But one thing was certain: the street vendor's fried egg with rice had done more than satisfy his hunger. It had awakened a soul starved for meaning. The cafe grew quieter as the lunch rush faded, leaving Ethan and Leo alone amidst the hum of distant conversations and the occasional clink of cups. Ethan stared at the napkin in his hand, the word authenticity glaring back at him like a challenge he wasn't sure he could meet. He glanced up at Leo, who was sipping coffee casually, seemingly unfazed by the gravity of their discussion. For someone who lived on the fringes of society, cooking meals from a cart, hustling for tips, Leo exuded an ease that Ethan envied. It was as if the man carried no weight, no burden, even though logic told Ethan that life as a street vendor couldn't possibly be easy. "How do you do it?" Ethan blurted out suddenly, surprising himself. Leo raised an eyebrow, setting his cup down. "Do what?" "Live like this," Ethan clarified, gesturing vaguely toward the window where the city buzzed relentlessly outside, "without worrying about everything falling apart." His voice trailed off, unsure how to articulate the storm brewing inside him. Leo chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "You think my life's worry-free? Man, I've got bills, dreams, failures just like anyone else. The difference is, I don't let them define me." There was a quiet conviction in his tone, a certainty that made Ethan shift uncomfortably in his seat. How could Leo speak so confidently when Ethan, with all his resources and achievements, felt perpetually trapped? Ethan opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. Instead, he found himself asking something entirely different. "What's your dream then, if you're not just scraping by out there?" He gestured again, this time toward the street they'd left behind. Leo's expression softened, his eyes briefly drifting to the window. "I want to open a restaurant someday," he said simply, though his voice carried a flicker of longing. "A small place, nothing fancy, just somewhere people can feel welcome, like family. Food's supposed to bring people together, right? Not keep them apart. Ethan nodded slowly, struck by the simplicity and depth of Leo's vision. It was worlds away from his own corporate ambitions, which often revolved around profit margins and market dominance. Yet, sitting here now, listening to Leo talk about connection and community, Ethan wondered if maybe he'd been chasing the wrong things all along. The conversation flowed naturally after that, each question pulling them deeper into uncharted territory. Ethan learned more about Leo's past, the struggles of growing up in a low-income neighborhood, dropping out of school to support his siblings, and finding solace in cooking after years of odd jobs. Every detail painted a picture of resilience, of someone who refused to let circumstances dictate his worth. Meanwhile, Leo probed gently into Ethan's world, asking about the pressures of running a company, the sacrifices required to climb the ladder, and whether success truly felt as rewarding as everyone assumed. With every answer Ethan gave, he felt layers of pretense peel away, exposing vulnerabilities he'd buried beneath polished speeches and calculated decisions at one point. Leo leaned forward, his gaze piercing yet kind. "Do you ever stop to think about why you do what you do? Like really think about it?" Ethan froze, caught off guard by the directness of the question. Why did he work tirelessly, push others and himself to the brink, chase numbers that never seemed high enough? The answers he'd rehearsed countless times in boardrooms sounded hollow now, I guess. "I thought it would make me happy," he admitted, quietly, almost ashamed. But lately, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Leo didn't press him further. Instead, he reached across the table, tapping the napkin still clenched in Ethan's fist. "Maybe happiness isn't the goal. Maybe it's just a side effect of doing what matters." Those words lingered long after the meeting ended. As Ethan walked back to his office, the city felt different somehow, less imposing, more alive. People moved around him with purpose, laughter rang out from hidden corners, and the aroma of street food wafted through the air, grounding him in the present. But despite the fleeting sense of clarity, Ethan couldn't shake the unease simmering beneath the surface. What mattered, and how could he reconcile the gulf between his current reality and whatever authenticity Leo had urged him to pursue? These questions gnawed at him throughout the day, interrupting meetings and clouding his focus. By evening, he realized he needed space to think, to breathe. So instead of heading home, he wandered aimlessly through the streets, letting instinct guide his steps. Eventually, he found himself standing before Leo's cart once again. The vendor was packing up for the night, humming softly under his breath. When he noticed Ethan, his face lit up with recognition. "Back already," he teased, sealing the last container. Ethan smiled weakly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, couldn't stay away, I guess." Leo laughed, tossing a rag over his shoulder. "Well, pull up a stool. Let's chat some more." They sat together on folding chairs beside the cart, the neon glow of nearby signs casting colorful shadows on the pavement. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was companionable, filled only with the distant murmur of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Then Leo broke it, his tone lighter than before. "So, what's eating at you now?" Ethan sighed, staring at the ground. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know. You said earlier that happiness isn't the goal, it's a side effect. But if it's not happiness, then what am I supposed to be aiming for?" Leo tilted his head, considering the question. "Purpose," he replied finally. "Something bigger than yourself. Something that makes you feel like you're contributing, not just consuming." The simplicity of the answer stunned Ethan. Purpose. Wasn't that what he'd been searching for all along, even if he hadn't known how to name it? He thought about his company, the products they developed, the lives they impacted or failed to impact. Had he been too focused on profits to see the potential for genuine change? As they talked, Ethan began to share fragments of his story, his rise from modest beginnings to the pinnacle of corporate success, the sacrifices he'd made along the way, and the growing sense of emptiness that haunted him despite his accomplishments. Leo listened without judgment, nodding occasionally or offering a thoughtful comment. At one point he asked, "Do you ever wonder if your success is costing you more than it's worth?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He'd never framed it that way before, but now the idea lodged itself firmly in his mind. Success wasn't free, it demanded trade-offs, compromises, pieces of himself he might never get back. Was it too late to reclaim those lost parts? Their conversation stretched late into the night, punctuated by moments of laughter, introspection, and uncomfortable truths. By the time Ethan stood to leave, the streets were nearly deserted, the city settling into its nocturnal rhythm. Leo handed him a small container of fried egg with rice, wrapped neatly in paper. "For the road," he said with a wink. Ethan accepted it gratefully, feeling a warmth spread through him not just from the food, but from the connection they'd forged. "Thanks," he murmured, meaning it in ways words couldn't fully capture. Leo grinned, waving him off. "Anytime, boss." Walking home, Ethan replayed their exchange in his head, dissecting every word, every nuance. Leo's insights had planted seeds of doubt, yes, but also seeds of possibility. Could he pivot his career towards something meaningful? Could he use his influence to create real change instead of merely accumulating wealth? The question swirled endlessly, keeping him awake long after he'd settled into bed. Sleep eluded him, replaced by restless thoughts and half-formed plans. At some point, he rose and retrieved the napkin from his pocket, staring at the words scrawled across it. Authenticity. It felt like both a promise and a threat, a path forward fraught with uncertainty, but brimming with potential. Morning brought no relief. If anything, the weight of unresolved tension grew heavier. Ethan arrived at the office distracted, snapping at assistants and zoning out during critical presentations. His colleagues exchanged concerned glances, whispering about his unusual behavior. Normally, such scrutiny would have irritated him, but today he barely registered it. All he could think about was Leo's advisement, the nagging suspicion that he'd been living a lie for far too long. During a rare moment of solitude, he pulled out his phone and began researching non-profits, social enterprises, and initiatives aimed at bridging societal gaps. Each discovery fueled a mix of excitement and dread. Excitement because these organizations embodied the kind of purpose Leo had described. Dread because pursuing such ventures would require dismantling much of what he'd built by mid. Frustration boiled over. Ethan stormed into his private office, slamming the door shut behind him. Pacing furiously, he wrestled with conflicting impulses. On one hand, he craved it desperately. On the other, fear held him hostage, whispering warnings of failure, ridicule, loss. What if he abandoned his empire only to find himself adrift, directionless? What if his attempts to contribute fell short, leaving him worse off than before? The internal battle raged on, exhausting him mentally and emotionally. Desperate for perspective, he dialed the number of an old friend, a former colleague who had left the corporate world to start a sustainable farming project. When she answered, her cheerful voice provided a brief reprieve from his turmoil. "Ethan, long time no hear. What's up?" He hesitated, unsure how to broach the topic. Finally, he confessed, "I'm thinking about making a change, a big one, but I don't know if I'm ready or if I'll regret it." She listened patiently, offering encouragement without pressure. "Change is scary," she acknowledged, "but staying stuck is scarier. Trust me, I've been there. Sometimes you just have to take the leap and figure it out as you go." Her words resonated deeply, echoing Leo's earlier advice. Still, doubt lingered. Could he really step away from the life he'd worked so hard to build? Hours later, as dusk settled over the city, Ethan found himself drawn back to the streets where it all began. The vendor's cart was gone, packed away for the night. But the spot remained a reminder of the connection he'd forged and the lessons he'd learned. He lingered there, watching shadows lengthen and lights flicker on in nearby buildings. Somewhere in the distance, laughter erupted, followed by the faint strains of music. Life went on, indifferent to his inner turmoil. Yet, amidst the chaos, Ethan felt a flicker of resolve, a determination to seek answers, no matter how daunting the journey ahead. Little did he know, fate had other plans. Unbeknownst to him, a letter awaited him at home, its contents destined to complicate matters further. Addressed in bold handwriting, it bore no return address. Only a cryptic message scrawled across the envelope. "Your choices will define you." Ethan stared at the envelope, his fingers hovering above it as if expecting it to bite. The bold handwriting was unfamiliar, and the lack of a return address sent a shiver down his spine. Who would send him something like this? And why now, when his mind was already tangled in knots? He turned the envelope over, examining the edges for any clue, but found nothing. Finally, with a deep breath, he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. Unfolding it, revealed a short message written in the same bold hand. *, your choices will define you. Choose wisely. * beneath the cryptic warning was a series of numbers, coordinates. Ethan's heart raced as he pulled out his phone to check what they pointed to. After a quick search, he discovered the coordinates led to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. His gut told him to dismiss it as some prank or scam, but curiosity gnawed at him relentlessly. Why would someone go through the trouble of sending such a vague yet deliberate message? He tried calling Leo, hoping the vendor might have some insight, but the call went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, Ethan paced his apartment, weighing his options. Part of him wanted to ignore the letter altogether, chalking it up to coincidence or mischief. But another part, the restless, searching part that had been awakened by Leo's words, urged him to investigate. What if this was somehow connected to the questions plaguing him? What if the answer to his inner turmoil lay hidden in that decrepit building? By midnight, the pull became too strong to resist. Grabbing his coat and car keys, Ethan stepped into the cool night air, the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily on his shoulders. The drive to the warehouse felt surreal, like stepping into a dream or a nightmare. The streets grew quieter the farther he ventured from the city center, the hum of traffic replaced by eerie silence. When he finally arrived, the structure loomed before him, its broken windows and rusted walls exuding decay. A flickering street lamp cast long shadows across the cracked parking lot, adding to the ominous atmosphere. Ethan hesitated, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Was he being reckless, foolish? Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to retreat to the safety of his predictable life. Yet, something deeper, a quiet voice he barely recognized, whispered that this was exactly where he needed to be. Steeling himself, he stepped out of the car, the sound of his footsteps echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Inside the warehouse was darker than he'd anticipated, the faint moonlight filtering through shattered glass doing little to illuminate the space. Ethan fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to navigate the maze of debris and discarded machinery. The air smelled musty, laced with a metallic Thames of rust and neglect. As he moved deeper, he noticed markings on the walls, graffiti, symbols and phrases scrawled in paint and chalk. Some were illegible, others unsettlingly cryptic. "What you seek is also seeking you. Truth lies beyond fear." Each phrase seemed designed to unsettle him further, amplifying the tension coiled in his chest. Then, just as doubt threatened to overwhelm him, he spotted a figure standing at the far end of the room. It was cloaked in shadow, its features obscured. Ethan froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound firm. The figure didn't respond immediately, instead taking a slow step forward. When it finally emerged into the dim light, Ethan's breath caught. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes piercing yet unreadable. She wore a tattered coat that hung loosely on her frame, and in her hand she clutched a small leather-bound journal. Without a word she extended it toward him, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Ethan hesitated, unsure whether to approach or retreat. "What is this?" he asked cautiously. The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression inscrutable. "Answers," she replied simply, her voice low and raspy. "But only if you're ready to face them." Her words sent a chill through him, raising more questions than they answered. Ready for what? Answers to what? Before he could press her further, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as she'd appeared. Left alone with the journal, Ethan sank onto a nearby crate, his mind racing. The book felt heavier than it should, its worn cover bearing no title or markings. Opening it revealed pages filled with handwritten notes, sketches, and fragments of prose, all seemingly disjointed yet oddly compelling. Some entries discussed corporate greed and societal inequality, while others delved into personal struggles, fears, and aspirations. Flipping through the pages, Ethan began to notice recurring themes: authenticity, purpose, connection. It was as though someone had been documenting the very questions tormenting him, albeit from a vastly different perspective. One passage in particular caught his eye: "Success without meaning is emptiness, disguised as achievement." The line resonated deeply, striking a chord he couldn't ignore. Who had written this? And how did it relate to him? As Ethan continued reading, snippets of conversation echoed in his mind: Leo's advice about finding purpose, his friend's encouragement to take risks, even the graffiti on the warehouse walls. Everything seemed interconnected, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he was assembling. Yet the more he read, the more unsettled he became. Certain entries hinted at consequences for those who chose poorly, warnings wrapped in metaphors of lost souls and fractured identities. Were these meant for him, or were they remnants of someone else's journey, left behind as cautionary tales? The uncertainty gnawed at him, twisting his thoughts into knots. He wanted to believe this was all part of some elaborate ruse, but the sincerity embedded in the words made dismissal impossible. By the time he returned home, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, the journal spread open before him. Each page offered new insights, new challenges, forcing him to confront truths he'd buried beneath layers of ambition and denial. At one point, his phone buzzed, startling him. It was a text from Leo. *, "You okay? You've been MIA." Ethan stared at the screen, debating how much to share. How could he explain the strange events of the night without sounding unhinged? Finally, he typed a vague response. *, "Just dealing with some stuff. Need to talk soon." Leo replied almost instantly, "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." *, the exchange provided a sliver of comfort, grounding him momentarily. But the looming mystery refused to release its grip. Over the next few days, Ethan oscillated between obsession and avoidance, torn between diving deeper into the journal and pretending it didn't exist. Work suffered as a result. Meetings dragged on without his input, deadlines slipped through his fingers, and colleagues whispered about his erratic behavior. Even his usual coping mechanisms, exercise, meditation, late-night drives, failed to provide relief. Everywhere he turned, echoes of the journal haunted him, its messages seeping into his subconscious until they colored every thought, every decision. Meanwhile, Leo sensed something was off. Their conversations during brief encounters grew strained. Ethan's responses clipped and distracted. Concerned, Leo decided to dig deeper, using connections forged through years of hustling on the streets. He began asking around, piecing together rumors and tidbits about Ethan's company. What he uncovered shocked him: whispers of unethical practices, exploitation of workers, and environmental negligence. None of it aligned with the man he'd come to know, the conflicted soul searching for meaning amidst chaos. Determined to understand, Leo resolved to confront Ethan directly. If the CEO was grappling with guilt or regret, Leo believed honesty might help him find clarity. Their meeting took place at the cafe again, though the mood was markedly different this time. Ethan looked haggard, dark circles underlining his eyes, his usual composure replaced by raw vulnerability. Leo wasted no time cutting to the chase. "What's going on with you?" he demanded gently, leaning forward. Ethan hesitated, clutching the journal tightly beneath the table. For a moment, he considered confiding everything: the letter, the warehouse, the cryptic messages, but fear held him back. Instead, he deflected, mumbling something about stress and burnout. Leo studied him intently, sensing the evasion. "Listen, man, whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. Let me help." The sincerity in Leo's voice nearly broke Ethan. Tears welled up unexpectedly, blurring his vision. He blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. "I wish it were that simple," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. Leo reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's arm. "It can be. Start small. Tell me one thing you're struggling with right now." Ethan hesitated, then confessed haltingly, "I think I've done things, bad things, things I can't undo." Leo nodded slowly, his expression compassionate. "We all make mistakes. The question is, what are you going to do about M?" That question lingered long after their meeting ended, burrowing itself into Ethan's psyche. What was he going to do? Could he rectify the harm caused by his company, or was it too entrenched, too systemic? And what role did the journal play in all of this? Each unanswered query fueled his growing sense of urgency, pushing him closer to a crossroads he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. Yet amidst the turmoil, a glimmer of hope persisted, a fragile belief that perhaps redemption wasn't out of reach, that maybe the answers lay not in running away but in facing the truth. Hayton, little did he know, fate had one more twist in store. Waiting patiently in the shadows to test his resolve, Ethan's days blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and restless mornings. The journal had become both a lifeline and a chain, its cryptic entries pulling him deeper into a labyrinth of guilt and self-doubt. He found himself revisiting old decisions, every corner cut, every worker overlooked, every environmental report ignored, all in pursuit of profit. Each memory felt heavier than the last, pressing down on his chest until breathing became an effort. Yet, amidst the chaos, one thought refused to leave him. What are you going to do about M? Leo's words echoed in his mind like a mantra, relentless and unyielding. But doing something meant confronting not just his past but also the machine. He'd built a corporation that thrived on the very practices he now despised. He tried to focus on work, hoping routine might anchor him, but even the familiar rhythm of meetings and emails felt foreign now. His colleagues noticed the change. Some whispered behind closed doors, others approached him cautiously, asking if everything was all right. Ethan brushed them off with vague reassurances, though his strained smile did little to mask the turmoil within. At night, he pored over the journal again, searching for answers, for guidance. Some passages seemed almost prophetic, as if written specifically for him. Change demands sacrifice. Purpose requires courage. The messages gnawed at him, urging action while warning of consequences. What kind of sacrifice was he willing to make? And what would happen if he failed? One evening, after another long day of avoiding confrontation, Ethan received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered, only to hear a voice distorted by static. "You've seen the truth," it rasped. "Now it's time to act." Before Ethan could respond, the line went dead. His hands trembled as he stared at the phone, the weight of the message sinking in. Someone or something was watching, pushing him toward a reckoning he wasn't sure he was ready for. Panic bubbled inside him, but beneath it lay a flicker of resolve. Whoever this was, they knew enough to unsettle him but not enough to stop him. Not yet. The next morning, Ethan decided to visit the warehouse again, desperate for clarity. This time, he brought the journal with him, clutching it like a shield against the unknown. The drive felt longer, the silence in the car suffocating. When he arrived, the structure loomed larger than before, its decay more pronounced under the gray sky. Stepping inside, he half expected to find the mysterious woman waiting for him, but the space was empty, save for the graffiti-covered walls and scattered debris. Still, the air felt charged, as though the building itself held its breath. Ethan moved to the center of the room, opening the journal and flipping through its pages once more. As he read aloud, his voice trembling, the words seemed to reverberate, bouncing off the walls and filling the vast emptiness around him. Suddenly, the ground beneath him shifted slightly, startling him. Looking down, he realized he was standing on a trapdoor hidden beneath layers of dirt and grime. Heart pounding, he knelt and pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. For a moment, he hesitated, fear clawing at his throat, but curiosity and perhaps desperation won out. Clutching his phone for light, he descended cautiously, each step creaking ominously under his weight. The air grew colder the farther he went, carrying a faint metallic smell that made his stomach churn. At the bottom, he found himself in a dimly lit chamber, its walls lined with shelves stacked high with files. photographs, and documents. In the center stood a table, upon which lay a single file folder marked with his name. Ethan's breath hitched as he approached the table, dread pooling in his gut. Opening the folder, he discovered damning evidence: internal memos detailing illegal practices, whistleblower testimonies silenced, environmental reports falsified. It was all there, meticulously documented, a catalogue of sins he'd either committed or turned a blind eye to. His knees buckled, forcing him to sit heavily on a nearby stool. How had someone gathered all this? And why present it to him now? As he sifted through the papers, a realization dawned on him, cold and unrelenting. Whoever had orchestrated this wanted him to choose, to face the consequences of his actions or bury the truth forever. Either way, the decision would define him. Back above ground, Ethan emerged shaken, the folder clutched tightly in his hand. He drove aimlessly, his mind racing with possibilities. Could he expose the corruption without destroying his company and himself in the process? Or should he destroy the evidence, preserving his empire at the cost of his conscience? Neither option offered solace, each path fraught with peril. By the time he returned home, exhaustion had set in, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, he called Leo, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help," he said simply, the admission tasting bitter on his tongue. Leo didn't ask questions, only agreed to meet first thing in the morning. That their rendezvous took place at a quiet park, away from prying eyes. Ethan laid out the folder's contents, his hands shaking as he explained what he'd uncovered. Leo listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Finally, Leo spoke, his tone measured. "This is bigger than you, man. If you release this, it'll blow everything wide open. People will lose jobs, reputations will crumble, lives will change for better or worse." Ethan nodded grimly, already aware of the stakes. "But if I don't," he countered, his voice cracking, "then nothing changes. I stay complicit, and the cycle continues." Leo sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "There's no easy answer. Here, whatever you decide, you're gonna have to live with it. Just don't let fear dictate your choice." His words struck a nerve, reigniting the internal battle Ethan had been fighting for weeks. Fear, that insidious force that had kept him complacent, that had allowed him to ignore the cracks in his foundation. Was he brave enough to shatter the illusion of success and rebuild from the rubble? Or would he cling to the fragile empire he'd constructed, knowing it was built on lies? As the hours ticked by, Ethan retreated to his office, locking the door behind him. The folder sat on his desk, its presence oppressive, demanding resolution. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the storm brewing within those walls. Colleagues knocked, assistants called, but Ethan ignored them all, consumed by the enormity of the decision before him. Flipping through the journal one final time, he landed on a passage that stopped him cold. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. The words seared themselves into his mind, igniting a spark of defiance. He grabbed a pen, scribbling furiously on a blank sheet of paper. Plans formed in his head, reckless and uncertain but fueled by a newfound determination. Whatever happened next, he vowed to face it head-on. Just as he finished drafting his plan, his computer screen flickered, then displayed a single line of text. "Your time is running out." Ethan froze, his heart hammering wildly. Something was still watching, counting down to his moment of truth. The pressure mounted, squeezing the air from his lungs. He glanced at the clock. Midnight loomed mere hours away. With trembling hands, he began uploading the documents to a secure server, preparing to send them to journalists and regulatory bodies. Each click felt like stepping closer to the edge of a precipice, unsure whether he'd soar or plummet. As the final file uploaded, a sudden knock at his door startled him. "Mr. Carter," a voice called from the other side. Ethan hesitated, his finger hovering over the send button. Beyond that threshold lay either salvation or ruin, and the choice was his alone to make. Ethan's finger hovered over the send button, his breath shallow and uneven. The knock came again, louder this time, accompanied by a voice tinged with urgency. "Mr. Carter, we need to speak immediately." It was Claire, his trusted assistant, her tone betraying none of the usual warmth. He froze, torn between opening the door and completing the upload. What could she possibly want now? Had someone already uncovered what he was doing? His mind raced with possibilities as sweat beaded on his forehead. Finally, he whispered hoarsely, "Just a minute," buying himself precious seconds. With trembling hands, Ethan glanced at the screen one last time. The progress bar inched forward agonizingly slowly, each percentage point feeling like an eternity. He couldn't afford to stop, no, not when he was so close. Yet something about Claire's presence unsettled him. She rarely ventured into his office unannounced, especially this late at night. Taking a deep breath, he stood and opened the door, just wide enough to see her face. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes darted nervously toward the folder on his desk. "Sir, there's been an incident," she said carefully, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Ethan's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? He asked, though part of him already knew. Claire hesitated, closing the door behind her before speaking. One of our warehouses caught fire earlier tonight. The authorities are investigating, but initial reports suggest it wasn't an accident. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. The warehouse, the very one where he'd found the journal and the hidden chamber, was gone. A cold dread crept up his spine as pieces began falling into place. Whoever had orchestrated this elaborate game was escalating, forcing his hand before he could fully act. Claire continued, her voice low and urgent. There's more. Someone leaked preliminary findings to the press linking the fire to hazardous waste stored illegally on site. Reporters are already sniffing around, asking questions about your company's practices. Ethan staggered back, collapsing into his chair. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was calculated, designed to destabilize him further. The stakes had risen exponentially, and he was caught in the crosshairs. Do they know it's connected to me? He asked, his voice barely audible. Claire shook her head. Not yet, but if you don't address it soon, they will. The room spun as Ethan tried to process the implications. If the truth about the warehouse and its contents came out, it would unravel everything. His empire, his reputation, even his freedom might hang in the balance. Yet, sitting idly by while the system devoured itself wasn't an option either. Claire watched him intently, her loyalty wavering under the weight of uncertainty. What are you going to do? She asked finally, her voice softer now. Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. I don't have a choice anymore, he muttered bitterly. They've backed me into a corner. As Claire left, promising to buy him time, Ethan returned to his computer. The upload was nearly complete, but doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. Was releasing the documents still the right move, or would it only accelerate his downfall? His phone buzzed incessantly on the desk, notifications flooding in from panicked executives and PR teams scrambling to contain the damage. Each message felt like another nail in his coffin. Then, buried among the chaos, a single text from Leo appeared. Asterisk whatever you're facing. Remember why you started. Asterisk the simplicity of the reminder struck a chord, grounding him momentarily. But clarity didn't last long. Just as the upload finished, his screen flickered again, displaying a new message. You can't outrun the truth. This time, however, the text was accompanied by a video feed, a live stream showing Claire walking briskly through the parking lot below. Behind her, two shadowy figures followed, their intentions unmistakable. Ethan's blood ran cold. They weren't just targeting him, they were coming for anyone who got too close. He grabbed his phone, dialing Claire frantically. Get out of there, he shouted as soon as she answered. You're being followed. There was a beat of silence before she replied, her voice trembling. I know, I saw them. The revelation sent shockwaves through Ethan. Claire hadn't come to warn him out of concern for the company. She'd come because she was already involved, already compromised. And now, she was in danger because of him. Guilt crashed over him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him. Find somewhere safe and stay there, he ordered, his voice cracking with emotion. I'll figure this out. Hanging up, he stared at the screen, the live feed still active. Watching Claire disappear into the shadows, flanked by those ominous figures, filled him with a rage he hadn't felt in years. Whoever was pulling the strings wanted him isolated. They underestimated how far he'd go to protect the people he cared about. His phone buzzed again, this time from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Let her go, he demanded, his voice steely despite the fear coursing through him. The distorted voice from before responded, calm and calculating. Then finish what you started. Release the documents, publicly, or watch her pay the price. The ultimatum left no room for negotiation. Ethan's mind raced, weighing the options. Could he trust them to keep their word, or was this another ploy to manipulate him further? Either way, the clock was ticking, and every second brought Claire closer to harm. Desperation drove him to action. He opened a secure messaging app and typed out a brief note to Leo, explaining the situation in vague terms. I need your help. Meet me at the cafe in 30 minutes. Bring cash and a burner phone. Sending the message, he grabbed his coat and bolted out of the office, leaving behind the remnants of the life he'd built. Outside, the city buzzed with oblivious energy, its inhabitants unaware of the storm brewing beneath their feet. Ethan moved quickly, weaving through crowds and avoiding main roads. Paranoia gripped him, every passerby seeming suspicious, every car trailing too closely. By the time he reached the cafe, his nerves were frayed, his pulse hammering in his ears. Leo was already there, seated at a corner table with a steaming cup of coffee. When he saw Ethan, his brow furrowed with concern. What's going on? He asked quietly, leaning forward. Ethan slid into the seat opposite him, his voice barely above a whisper. They've taken Claire. If I don't release the documents, she's dead. Leo's eyes widened, shock giving way to determination. Then we release them together. You're not doing this alone. For the first time in days, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, having someone else in his corner could tip the scales in his favor. But as they hashed out a plan, a nagging thought lingered at the edges of his mind. Whoever was orchestrating this game hadn't shown all their cards yet, And until they did, nothing and no one was truly safe. Ethan and Leo worked feverishly, their movements synchronized despite the chaos swirling around them. The cafe buzzed with the hum of late-night patrons, oblivious to the storm brewing at their table. Ethan's laptop glowed faintly, its screen displaying the final steps needed to release the documents to the world. Every click felt like a gamble, each second stretching into an eternity. "We need to time this perfectly," Ethan muttered, his eyes darting between the screen and the clock on the wall. Leo nodded, gripping the burner phone tightly in his hand. "I'll call Claire as soon as it's live. If they're watching us, we'll have to move fast." The plan was simple but risky. Upload the files to multiple secure servers simultaneously, ensuring the information couldn't be buried or deleted. Once released, they'd alert trusted journalists and watchdog organizations, forcing the truth into the public eye before anyone could stop them. But the unknown loomed large. How would their adversaries react? Would Claire be safe once the documents went public? Ethan's hands trembled as he initiated the upload process. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than to Leo. No turning back. As the progress bars filled, Ethan's phone buzzed violently on the table. A video feed popped up, showing Claire seated in a dimly lit room, her face pale but defiant. Behind her stood one of the shadowy figures, their presence menacing. The distorted voice crackled through the speakers. 10 seconds. Release the documents or she dies." Ethan's heart thundered in his chest, panic clawing at his throat. He glanced at Leo, who gave a sharp nod. "Do it," Leo urged, his voice steady despite the tension. With a deep breath, Ethan hit send. The screen flashed green, upload complete. Before either of them could exhale, the video feed cut abruptly, replaced by static. Ethan's stomach churned as silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant clink of dishes and murmured conversations from other tables. Then, unexpectedly, Claire's voice came through the phone, shaky but alive. "It's done," she said, relief evident in her tone. "They're pulling out. I'm safe for now." Ethan slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and disbelief. It had worked. They'd beaten the clock, but the victory was short-lived. Moments later, the cafe door burst open, and 2 men in suits stormed in, scanning the room with cold precision. Ethan's blood ran cold. How had they found them so quickly? Leo reacted first, grabbing the laptop and shoving it into his bag. "We need to go now," he hissed, already rising from the table. Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. Was this retaliation, or something worse? Together, they slipped out the back exit, disappearing into the labyrinth of alleys behind the cafe. The streets were eerily quiet, the city holding its breath as they moved swiftly, dodging shadows and avoiding streetlights. Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly, notifications pouring in from every direction, journalists, colleagues, even strangers, reacting to the bombshell revelations now flooding the internet. The truth was out, undeniable and unavoidable. Yet instead of triumph, Ethan felt annoying unease. Something about the timing felt off. Why hadn't their pursuers tried harder to stop them, and why had Claire been released so easily? Their escape route led them to an abandoned subway station, where Leo had arranged for a car to pick them up. As they waited, hidden among crumbling pillars and graffiti-covered walls, Ethan finally voiced the question haunting him. "Why didn't they kill us?" Leo frowned, considering the implications. Maybe they don't care anymore. Maybe exposing the truth was exactly what they wanted. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. The journal, the warehouse fire, the cryptic messages, it all pointed to someone playing a long game, manipulating events from the shadows. Just as the car arrived, headlights cutting through the darkness, Ethan's phone lit up with one final message. It wasn't from Claire or Leo, it was from the same unknown number that had haunted him since the beginning. The text read, "Congratulations, you've played your part beautifully." Beneath it was a single image, a photograph of Ethan's father, standing beside a man Ethan instantly recognized as the CEO of a rival corporation. His father's face was younger, but there was no mistaking the resemblance or the implication. Ethan's knees buckled as realization dawned. This wasn't just about his company, it was personal. Someone had been orchestrating this entire nightmare not to destroy him, but to expose a decades-old conspiracy involving his family. Leo steadied him, concern etched across his face. "What is it?" he asked, peering over Ethan's shoulder. Ethan shook his head, struggling to process the revelation. "It's my dad," he choked out. "He's involved. All of this. They used me to take him down." The betrayal cut deeper than anything he'd faced before. His father, the man he'd idolized, the man whose legacy he'd strived to uphold, had been complicit in the very corruption Ethan had spent weeks unraveling. That as the car sped away into the night, Ethan stared out the window, the city blurring past in streaks of light, the weight of everything pressed down on him, leaving him hollow yet strangely free. The truth had cost him everything: his empire, his reputation, even his faith in those closest to him. But in its place was something unexpected: clarity. For the first time in years, Ethan knew exactly who he was and who he wanted to be. Yet, as the car turned onto a deserted highway, a pair of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, growing brighter with each passing second. Whoever was behind them wasn't done yet. The headlights in the rearview mirror grew brighter, casting an ominous glow inside the car. Ethan's heart pounded as he turned to Leo, who was gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "They're gaining on us," Leo muttered, pressing the accelerator harder. The engine roared in response, but the other vehicle was relentless, closing the gap with alarming speed. Ethan glanced back again, his mind racing. Who were they? What did they want now? Hadn't exposing the truth been enough? Leo swerved sharply, onto a narrow side road, tires screeching against the asphalt. The sudden maneuver threw Ethan sideways, and he braced himself against the dashboard. "We can't outrun them forever," Ethan said, his voice strained. Leo shot him a quick glance, determination etched into his face. "Then we make sure they don't win." Ahead, the road twisted into dense woods, shadows swallowing the beams of their headlights. It was risky, dangerous even, but it was their only chance to lose the pursuers. Leo pushed the car deeper into the darkness, navigating blind turns with instincts honed by years of surviving on the streets. After what felt like an eternity, the headlights behind them vanished, swallowed by the thick canopy of trees. Ethan let out a shaky breath, though relief was fleeting. They couldn't afford to stop, not yet. Leo drove for another 10 minutes before pulling over near a secluded clearing. Both men stepped out, scanning the area cautiously. The forest was eerily silent, save for the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. Ethan leaned against the hood of the car, trying to steady his breathing. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out hesitantly, half expecting another cryptic message. Instead, it was Claire. "Are you okay?" she asked urgently, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Yeah, we lost them for now." Claire paused, then spoke softly. "There's something you need to know about your father." Her tone sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He'd already seen the photograph, already pieced together part of the puzzle. But there was more, wasn't there? "Tell me," he said, bracing himself. Claire exhaled deeply. "Your dad didn't just work with that rival CEO. He helped orchestrate some of the worst environmental violations your company committed. When whistleblowers started speaking up, he made sure they disappeared or worse." Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of her words crushing him. His father wasn't just complicit, he was at the center of it all. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire hesitated, then replied, "Because I think someone wants you to take his place." Exposing the truth wasn't just about justice, it was about power. Whoever set this whole thing in motion knew exactly how far you'd go to protect people like me. And now that the old guard is gone. She trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. Ethan clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm not taking his place," he growled. "Not like this." Back at the clearing, Leo watched Ethan silently, sensing the storm brewing within him. "What's next?" Leo asked finally, breaking the tension. Ethan looked at him, the street vendor who had become so much more than just a stranger. In many ways, Leo represented everything Ethan had lost in, everything he still hoped to regain. "I fixed this," Ethan said firmly. "No more running, no more hiding. If they want me to step into my father's shoes, fine, but I'll do it my way or not at all." The next morning, Ethan emerged from the shadows, walking straight into the headquarters of his own company. Reporters camped outside, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward as he pushed through the crowd. Inside, chaos reigned. Executives scrambled to contain the fallout, while employees whispered nervously in corners. Ethan ignored them all, heading directly for the boardroom. When he entered, the room fell silent. His father sat at the head of the table, flanked by lawyers and advisors. For a moment, neither man spoke, the air thick with unspoken accusations. "You've ruined everything," his father spat finally, his voice laced with venom. Ethan stared at him, seeing not the man he'd once admired but the architect of decades of greed and corruption. "No," Ethan replied calmly. "You did that yourself. All I did was shine a light on it." The room erupted into murmurs, but Ethan held up a hand, silencing them. "From today onward, things change. My company will prioritize transparency, sustainability, and accountability. Anyone unwilling to adapt can leave. That includes you." His declaration sent shockwaves through the room, but Ethan stood firm. Over the following weeks he dismantled the toxic systems his father had built, replacing them with initiatives aimed at healing the damage done. He partnered with nonprofits, hired former whistleblowers as consultants, and implemented policies ensuring fair treatment for workers. It wasn't easy. Resistance came from every corner, but Ethan refused to back down. Alongside him, Leo, he became an unlikely ally, using his culinary skills to launch a community kitchen funded by the company. Together they proved that success didn't have to come at the expense of humanity. Months later, Ethan found himself standing in the same cafe where it all began. Across from him sat Leo, their roles reversed now. Ethan grinned, raising a cup of coffee and mock toast. "2 fried eggs with rice," he said, laughter dancing in his eyes. Leo chuckled, shaking his head. "And to authenticity. Looks like you finally figured it out." Ethan nodded, sipping his drink thoughtfully. He hadn't forgotten the sacrifices made along the way, the sleepless nights, the betrayals, the fear, but he also hadn't forgotten the moments of connection, purpose, and hope. Those were the things that mattered most. As they parted ways, Ethan lingered outside, watching the city pulse with life. Somewhere in the distance, a street vendor called out to passing customers, their voice echoing faintly in the crisp air. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey hadn't ended, not truly, but for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. After all, courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it, and act he would, one step at a time, until the world reflected the change he'd fought so hard to create.